بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم له ملك السماوات والأرض يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وآله أجمعين وأصحابه المنتجبين. أما بعد، قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most gracious. Respectable audience, distinguished listeners, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, God willing, we are going to talk about divine justice and some of the doubts that have been raised on divine justice. But prior to treating this topic and those fundamental doubts, let's have a very brief revision of the previous session. In the previous session, we talked about the divine justice, the definitions, and we pointed out these noteworthy points and comments that in divine justice, for sure, everyone would receive the right and appropriate rewards or punishment. Every creature receives its own appropriate and proportionate right in accordance with the ability and capacity he has or she possesses. Secondly, these rewards and punishments admit degrees for our works in this world, and our faith in Almighty Allah admit degrees in various levels. A person with firm faith for sure would receive further and more reward than he who has only superficial faith. And a person with greater works, with remarkable and noteworthy successes in this world, he would spontaneously and naturally and obviously receive better achievements and rewards in the life hereafter. So since we have degrees in existence, since we have degrees in various levels in existential capacities, for sure the rewards and punishments will be subject to various degrees. Another important point that was mentioned, that was that equality should never be confused with justice. For example, if a teacher or an instructor gave equal remarks to all his students, he has just committed an unjust action. He has not been fair enough with all the students, making no difference he or she should be smart or lazy, for he has given unfair remarks and labels to those students. Yes, everyone should stand equal before the law, and no discrimination should be applied. but sometimes difference is part of justice. Yeah, we do accept that no difference should be accepted in terms and conditions or in standing equal before the law. But after that, everyone should meet what he deserves. Everyone should receive what he has gained, what he has achieved, neither more nor less than what he deserves. So, respectable audience and distinguished listeners, this was a very brief revision of the previous lecture. Today, God willing, we are going to touch some of those fundamental doubts that have been raised by some of the polytheists or some of the irreligious people or individuals in respect with the divine justice. Dear listeners and respectable audience, the first doubt that has been raised is this: that why we in this worldly life witness a large scale of differences. You know that some are human, and some are animal, and some are plants. Or in every category, there are different types. In every kind, there are different categories, there are different classes and levels. For example, in the class of human beings, some are doctors, some are engineers, some are lecturers, some are students. So why we witness a huge amount of differences amongst all the Almighty Allah's creatures? They assume that the existence of these differences or the existence of this spectrum of differences amongst the Almighty Allah's creatures imply Almighty Allah's injustice. To simplify this doubt, once again, I reiterate, they think that the difference they witness in this world amongst all Almighty Allah's creatures, that implies Almighty Allah's injustice. They think that all should be standing equally, or all should stand equal, all should be similar. Why these amount of differences? According to them, the difference between Almighty Allah's existence, between Almighty Allah's creatures, connotes Almighty Allah's injustice or being unfair with His creatures. For example, the plant would sometimes complain that why I am created as a plant, or the human beings with different types and with different categories, they will sometimes might complain why we are created as human. The response to this question or to the response to this doubt is this: that Almighty Allah has created this universe, but we have to keep it in mind that had not been these differences, had not been these conflicts, had not been these opposite sides, there would have been no creation. There would have been no name for the universe. The world of the matter is full of opposites. Negative and positive creates electricity. Had there been only positives, those who favor positives, or had there been only negatives, for sure we would have been divested and deprived of having electricity and having these lights.
سبحان الله عما يشركون.
So the combination of positives and negatives make the world gloom, make the world flourish, make the world develop. We should never think that the positive and negatives are totally void and they are of no use. No, they are fully of use. They are fully useful. But one thing it should be kept in mind, dear listeners, had Almighty Allah not created the universe and the whole creatures with their opposite sides, all the creature would have been extinguished, would have been extinct by passage of time. For example, think that Almighty Allah had created all His creature or all the human beings in female form. Or think that all the human beings have been of male gender. For sure, after a decade or after a century, the whole human generation would have been extinguished or would extinguish. The whole human generation would extinct. For there is no production, for there is no place for giving or for extending the human generation. So here the response is this, that had Almighty Allah created all His creature in a similar position, in a similar form, in a similar capability and capacity, we actually had not creation, we had not creatures. For they are intertwined with one another. Their creature, their being, their life, each and everything, they are dependent on one another. Every one of them plays its important and unique role in its appropriate place and position. Otherwise, they will be futile. Or for example, Almighty Allah had created nothing but the human beings. So the question arises, where they have to sustain, where they have to provide their sustenance then? Where the foods and the diets or the nourishments should be provided for them if no plant was there, if no flower was there? So for sure, they would have been remaining in constant need of their nourishment. Think or assume that Almighty Allah had not created animals. Or think that Almighty Allah had not created water, or these beautiful mountains, or these beautiful valleys. So respectable audience and distinguished listeners, each and everything in this world can be interpreted, can be justified in its due place, in its due position. Our eyes, our eyebrows, our face, every one of them have been beautifully designed by Almighty Allah and had their own appropriate place and position. Had Almighty Allah created otherwise, for sure there would have been difficulties for the human beings. So this is the response to this problem, to this doubt, that Almighty Allah created all the things, all the universe with differences, but this difference and this diversity is the strength. The diversity is the strength of the creation and the creators. So respectable audience, the second doubt that they pose is that why Almighty Allah had created the death? Why we are to eventually face death? Had Almighty Allah been just, He would not have been created death. He would not have made us face death. This is another doubt and problem they pose against divine justice. In regard with this doubt, it should be mentioned, dear listeners, that they have actually misunderstood the phenomenon of death. They have actually misunderstood death. They do not have a real picture from death. Firstly, death is the implication of cause and effect system. The whole universe is rotating and devolving around cause and effect. Almighty Allah, this is Almighty Allah's fundamental custom that everything should rotate around cause and effect. So this cause and effect implies somebody's death. And it should not be rebuked, it should not be refuted, it should not be criticized. Why? Because if you criticize the implications, the logical and rational implication of a rational system, it means that you have not accepted the whole system. When you accepted the system, when you could prove that the whole system is in its best form, it is based on Nizam Ahsan, so the implications should also be accepted. So what should be dealt with death? The response is that, firstly, death is the implication of cause and effect system. And cause and effect system is of those basic and fundamental and well-established philosophical, we can say, principle that cannot be ignored. This is first. Secondly, death is not annihilation. Death is not tantamount to destruction. Death is not equivalent to annihilation. You know that sometimes the people are afraid of death. Why? Because they think and they define death as destruction, while Almighty Allah does not do it. Almighty Allah does not define it as annihilation. It is a door that we have to enter our eternal life. Yes, for those who have done evils in this world, it will not be a good entrance. It will not be a good place. It will not be a very favorable abode. Yes, for those who have done their best in this world, for sure, the moment they die, they will be embraced, they will be received wholeheartedly by the angels. You know, dear listeners, we have this very beautiful and interesting tradition that when a faithful man, when a faithful woman dies and passes away from this world, the angels embraces him and her, telling and giving him the tiding news or the good news that he will be rewarded by Almighty Allah. He will not be disturbed. He will not face any challenging situation. Yes, for those who have done wrong, for those who have done the gravest sins, for sure, spontaneously, he has to wait, he has to expect the bitter and the most painful chastisement. This is true. But death is not tantamount to destruction and annihilation. When we define death as a new beginning, so why we have to be afraid of death and why we have to be extremely concerned of death? Death seems to be like the birth of a new child. When a child comes from his genetic life and enters into his new physical life in this world, for sure everyone celebrates his birth. Everyone is happy seeing that a new child is born because he has just begun a new lifestyle, a new life. The same case is true for the death. With death, we are not destroyed. Rather, our soul, our personality would get evolved by entering into the new world.
إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.
So we should not think that death is running or encounter Almighty Allah's justice. No, Almighty Allah is fair enough. With death, Almighty Allah's justice cannot be put into question. Almighty Allah's justice is unquestionable, leaving no room for the objections made by these disbelievers or by these irreligious-minded individuals that say death is running counter to Almighty Allah's justice. No, if we have a very concrete and precise definition of death, then we will not raise this baseless objection on Almighty Allah's justice. The third most important doubt that is raised against divine justice, that is the existence of evils in this world. The existence of natural catastrophes, natural disasters, calamities, floods, earthquakes, diseases, illness. All these are packed in a pack called evils. They try to embark on the existence of evils as a doubt, as an objection against Almighty Allah's justice. Firstly, it should be mentioned, in a material world, all these differences, all these conflicts of each and everything, conflicts of interest, conflicts of existence, conflicts of these and that, they are all innate and essential. As it was mentioned that, had we not wished that Almighty Allah should not create a materialistic world that should be an appropriate abode for human beings to reside in, for sure, we would have expected that no creation should come into being. But if we say that, O Almighty Allah, you may bless us being, you may bless us existence, when Almighty Allah creates the existence, when Almighty Allah creates, so all these are the implication of materialistic world. And these implications cannot be taken away from this materialistic world. If we take, for example, if a person say, oh Almighty Allah, you create this world, but no disease should be there, or we should never witness a disease in this world, or we should never witness an earthquake in this world, or we should never ever see a natural disaster in this world, that is impossible. Because, as it was said, the contradictions in the physical world is a must. Otherwise, there will be no beauty, there will be no creation, there will be no evolution. A host of responses have been given to this doubt. And of course, we cannot touch all of them due to the extent and the scope of our program. But one important point in response should be mentioned, that these implications, these natural disasters are the essential part of the being in existence. We cannot say that the existence should be there without any natural disaster, without any, for example, natural calamities and catastrophes, or without any flood, without any rain. First, secondly, the evils are relative. If, for example, flood is catastrophic for someone else, it is a matter of life for a huge amount of people. So it suits best that a person should be sacrificed for the sake of 1,000 of human beings. This is another important point. Even that man who has been victimized of this flood, he can take measures that he should not be victimized of this flood. And evil is from non-existence. Evil is not something that should be from the existence. Evil is from nothing. Evil is from those non-existent. Another important point that should be added, لولا التضاد ما صح دوام الفيض عن المبدأ والوجود. You know that if there was not conflict, there was not the opposite sides, we would not have witnessed the whole creation. So this is another response to the doubts of the evils. But for those who are very much keen to have their questions, precise questions solved, I refer them, I would like to say that there is a book written by the name of Divine Justice. by Murtada Mutahari, and he has dealt with this important topic in a very, very good manner. So since the scope of this program does not suit that we have to cover all those issues, I have just sufficed to these three important doubts in the responses that we have provided you, dear listeners. May God bless us all. May God treat us with His bounties rather than His justice. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
اللهم انفعنا بالعلم وزينا بالحلم وجملنا بالعافية وكرمنا بالتقوى إن وليي الله الذي نزل الكتاب وهو يتولى الصالحين